Many people see death not as the end, but as the beginning of something much more important. It's a very moving thought. Someone like Padre Pio had a life that was like a journey to heaven. Just before he died, something amazing happened to him that left everyone around him speechless. Padre Pio's health was poor in 1968, but his spirit was strong. He was immovable. He did not want to leave his work, even though he was weak and very ill. He would not stop until he heard confessions. He often said he wanted to die without giving up his life's work, his prayers and his service. Imagine him always going the extra mile and living each day as if it were his last. He never knew if he would live another day, so every night, when he said goodbye to his Capuchin brothers, he would ask them to pray to the Lord for him. Death did not frighten him, but he could feel it, like a shadow that was always ready to take him away. Please click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you like what you are seeing and want to see more stories like this one. You help us tell you more stories like this one. A few months before he died, he asked for an image of Saint Joseph to be placed next to his cell. Every day he would stop there and look at the image in silence. Shortly thereafter, we learned that he had asked Saint Joseph for a quiet death. During those weeks, a strange calm pervaded the monastery. Many people say that there was an eerie silence in the corridors, in the rooms, and even in the general areas. Padre Pio prayed more and more as his last days approached. From the prayers he prayed as a child at Pietrelcina to the solemn Our Father he prayed in his cell during his last hours, prayer always accompanied him, in good times and in bad. His whole life was a prayer, a conversation with God that never ended. Padre Pio always knew that his time on earth was short and that he was on his way to heaven. He looked forward to the day when he would be with God forever. One day, he wrote to Father Agostino to tell him that he was tired of living on earth. He said that his life here was bitter torture, and that he was terrified at the thought of losing Jesus. Just before he died, he went to his superiors and humbly asked them to pray for him. It was the last act of his lifelong devotion. His story is not just the end of a journey. It is also a reminder of how faith can change your life and give you hope that lasts forever. As Padre Pio's time on earth was coming to an end, he spent his last moments in a deep spiritual presence. The night before he died, Pio renewed his vows to be a Franciscan, even though he was very ill. He whispered, "Jesus, Mary," as he held his rosary, showing the strength of his faith. Around 2:30 a.m., something very interesting changed. Padre Pio, known for his mystical experiences, suddenly had visions that no one else could see. He said in a whisper, "I see 2 mothers." This could be a reference to the Virgin Mary and his own mother, who was also named Mary. This lack of clarity gave his last hours a mysterious air. On the last day, the stigmata, which showed her spiritual suffering, began to fade. The people who were there said that the scales were falling off her hand, signifying that the miracle was over. After his death, the doctors could not find any signs of the stigmata. His skin was smooth and healthy, which made them believe that God had helped him. The room smelled of orange blossom, which has long been associated with Padre Pio. Padre Pio's funeral was very lavish, which showed the impact he had on people's lives. Around 100,000 people came to mourn him, and flowers and holy cards were dropped on them from helicopters. His final resting place, in a granite crypt under the altar of the church, continues to attract people who want to learn from a man whose life was a channel of God's grace. He often said, "I can help you more from heaven than on earth." He kept his word, and his disciples still follow him and his advice. His mission lives on after his death. Padre Pio was celebrating Mass in San Giovanni Rotondo, and the air was filled with a deep spiritual energy. This was a special event, It was not just any Mass, it was a Mass of thanksgiving for the worldwide network of prayer groups that had recently been recognized by the Holy Office in Rome. Padre Pio was very happy because he knew that all his work to consolidate these groups had borne fruit and that they were now functioning well all over the world. As he was walking away from the altar, he felt faint and almost fell, but his Capuchin brothers quickly caught him and kept him from falling. With so many faces in front of him, Padre Pio's trembling, broken voice was the only thing that could connect him to his children. My children, my children. Later that day, Padre Pio leaned out of a window of the monastery to bless the people in the piazza below, even though he was already very ill. With the help of his two brothers, his presence at the window showed how much he loved his spiritual children. That night, around 9 p.m., Padre Pio called Padre Pellegrino on the intercom, which was a very touching moment. When Pellegrino entered, he saw Padre Pio crying, which was strange for the normally quiet monk. Pellegrino made sure all was well before returning to his quarters after comforting him and telling him the time. During these quiet moments of reflection, Padre Pio said he wanted to renew his religious vows. He recited his promise to be poor, holy, and obedient with great sincerity. I, Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, swear and promise to Almighty God, to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to our Holy Father Saint Francis, and to all the saints, to observe all the days of my life the rule of the Friars Minor, confirmed by Pope Honorius. Although he was suffering from arthritis and was in great pain, that night something surprising happened. In a great departure from his frequent need for a wheelchair, Padre Pio was able to get up and walk quickly to the veranda without any assistance. When he reached the veranda, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He reached out and turned on the light himself. Then he focused on a particular spot on the porch, as if he could see beyond what he saw. Does this story make you feel anything? If so, give us a like and a super thanks to show your support. Thank you for your help. It makes us want to share more amazing stories like this one. In the evening, when all was very quiet, Padre Pio stood on the veranda and looked ahead to where his body would be taken in a few hours. Just then, a wave of sickness hit him. He was weak and could not hold himself up, so he had to return to his room immediately. His skin became very pale, which was a clear sign that his strength was fading fast. She kept repeating, "Jesus, Mary," over and over again, but her voice was getting lower and lower. On the wall was a picture of Padre Pio's parents, and as her illness worsened, it caught her attention. He said in a confused voice, "But I see two mothers." His words hung in the air as he collapsed from a severe asthma attack. Because she was struggling so badly, the room became cold and her breathing became laboured. Her skin became cold and clammy. A doctor arrived at his side within minutes and gave him an injection and administered oxygen to try to get his breathing back to normal. But as the medical work got harder, so did the spiritual work. The Capuchins prayed aloud, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I give you my heart and soul." Their voices were quiet, which stood out against the chaos around them. Father Paolo conducted the last rites, while Padre Pio, who was fully aware of what was going on around him, struggled to breathe. Although he was cold and sweating profusely, he seemed at peace. An emergency injection was administered directly into his heart because his condition pointed to a heart attack. In his last moments, Padre Pio's faith did not waver. As he lost the ability to speak, his lips moved silently to form the name Jesus. His spiritual brothers, the Capuchins, called out to him, hoping to see some sign of recognition. He opened his eyes for the last time and looked at them with love and a hint of farewell. Padre Pio died peacefully at 2:30 a.m. on September 23, 1968, while holding his rosary close to him. Earlier, on September 20th, the 50th anniversary of the reception of his stigmata was celebrated. It was a big day, and many of his followers who lived far away came to adorn Mass to honor him. For them, it was a very important day. For Padre Pio, it was just another day dedicated to his faith, where he continued to do the things he had always done: serve others and pray. It showed how dedicated he was to his spiritual journey. Today is the 50th anniversary of the stigmata, and the Mass in the church was a simple and reflective event, very much in line with what Padre Pio wanted. There were no speeches or grand festivities. Instead, there was a quiet celebration of faith and devotion. The sanctuary was filled with hundreds of deep red roses, representing Padre Pio's deep devotion to the Passion of Christ. The beautiful roses were also placed on the crucifix on which he received the stigmata in 1918. It was a touching tribute to the 50 years he spent carrying the wounds of Christ. Those attending the Mass were moved by Padre Pio's tears of sorrow and devotion. He not only participated in the Mass, but lived it with his every movement and expression, reliving Christ's death on the cross. He often had tears on his face, which he quickly wiped away with his handkerchief. By order of his bosses, the Mass was brief. It lasted only 30 minutes. The next day, Padre Pio had died. Those attending the anniversary Mass and the International Congress of Prayer Groups were shocked. Many of his spiritual children were with him at the end of his life, which seemed like a gift from God. Yes, Padre Pio had been thinking for a long time about when he would die. In 1966, he told his niece Pia Foggione Pinelli that he would not live more than 2 years. Later, he told a friend that he would die at 81, which turned out to be true. He was very sure that his time was about to end. He even begged Father Onorato Marcucci, a close collaborator, to return early from vacation so that his family and friends could be with him as his death approached. Padre Pio had visions of the building rising up around him. He told his spiritual daughter, Josephine Bove, that he would die when the crypt of the Church of Notre-Dame de Grâce was finished, although he wanted to be buried in a simple tomb rather than in a large crypt. Although the new church was completed in 1959, the crypt was not finished until much later, further complicating the story of his last days. Padre Pio passed away 16 hours after uttering his last words. He left behind a mysterious legacy, but an even more amazing part of the story remains to be told. A touching story took place in the busy area of San Giovanni Rotondo a few days before Padre Pio died. A woman from Catania, Sicily, had a simple but profound wish: to see Padre Pio and kiss his hand. Because of the crowds and her lack of money, her dream seemed impossible. But after having a vivid dream in which Padre Pio told him that he had to visit him quickly, he borrowed money and made the trip. Her persistence moved a kindly priest, who arranged a brief appointment. As she passed by, Padre Pio stopped, looked at her tenderly, and blessed her in a way that brought tears to her eyes. She told Padre Pio how grateful she was for this unexpected gift of grace. Little did she know that this would be one of her last blessings before she died 15 days later. At the same time, Gino Pian's story brought to light another amazing act of kindness from Padre Pio. Gino, a devotee from Biella, was upset about his daughter Maria Pia's health, which he thought was very bad, because she might have a tumor or peritonitis. He asked Padre Pio for help through Padre Alberto. Padre Pio's answer was clear. Maria Pia should not move and should be operated on immediately if necessary. A few hours after Padre Pio's prayer, Maria Pia miraculously improved. Her recovery was so complete that she was sent home from the hospital immediately. This happened just one day before Padre Pio's death, and is often considered his last miracle. Meanwhile, Marissa Liberati, a native of Rome and Padre Pio's spiritual daughter, loved to receive spiritual advice from him every 2 weeks. She also wanted Padre Pio to give her 2 nieces their first communion. He told them that he would be happy to give them communion when they finished their religious education in Rome. Lucia and Anna, nieces of Marissa Liberati, finished their religious education in San Giovanni Rotondo. They were excited to make their first communion, which is a big spiritual step. Their parents were hesitant and delayed, but Marissa, inspired by a dream, decided to take the girls immediately to Padre Pio. Padre Pio's voice was urgent in her dream, telling her to act quickly instead of going to Lourdes. She heeded this call and made plans for the girls to go to San Giovanni Rotondo while dressed in their first communion gowns. On that sad September 22nd, the church was full of the faithful who were part of Padre Pio's worldwide prayer groups. It was a very important spiritual day, and Padre Pio was there, though weak and sick. His presence was a comfort to those present. In a very moving ceremony, he gave Holy Communion to Lucia and then to Anna. It was a happy moment in their lives. Anna Fanoni was the last person to receive Holy Communion from Padre Pio before she died the following day. Throughout his life, Padre Pio showed unwavering faith and devotion. He was certain that God was with us and that all would be well. He taught that the best way to connect with God was through prayer and humility. He often said, "Prayer is the best weapon we have. It is the key that opens God's heart." His teachings emphasized the grace of humility, the virtue of purity, and living according to God's will, especially when faced with great problems in one's life. Padre Pio had a deep spiritual vision. He saw life as a battlefield, and each battle as a step towards the final victory in paradise. He told his disciples to remain calm and resigned in difficult moments, and to always trust in the love of Jesus to protect them. "Jesus will never abandon you," he would tell them, reinforcing the idea that suffering on earth is fleeting compared to the eternal reward that awaits them in paradise. When Padre Pio's time on earth came to an end, his words and actions continued to inspire and guide his spiritual children. He left a legacy of faith that will outlast his own life. You are welcome. If this story touched you, please subscribe, leave a like, and even a super thank you to show your support. Your support helps us keep sharing stories like this one. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos.